Hi there. I'm Jen Henderson, and I'm a clinical counselor with mental wellness and substance use services. And today I'm going to continue our discussion on anxiety. And specifically, today we're going to look at our thoughts. All right. So, if you were tuning into the last video, we really focused in on our behaviors and what kind of actions that we can do to reduce our anxiety. So just to revisit this model, what we learned in the last video is that there is a connection between the way we feel, the way we think, and our actions. And if we can make a change in our behavior or in our thoughts, that can actually change the way we feel. So in today's video, what I'm going to get into is more specifically on our thoughts and what we can do to change our thoughts so that we can change the way we feel. All right. So what I'm going to begin with is this thinking model. And what I'm going to try to prove to you is that different events or situations that happen to us are not the cause of our emotions. Things outside of us, certain situations, don't automatically make us feel a certain way. That there's another step that's in the middle, which I'll get to in a second. But just to prove that, if we think of the coronavirus as an example, that's a pandemic that most people around the world are being impacted by. And because of that event, we're all feeling something about it. And we know that events do not automatically cause us to feel a certain way, because if that were the case, then we would all feel the same. We would all feel anxious or worried about it or upset about it, but we know that's not the case. If you talk to, you know, 20 people on the street around the world about their reaction or how they're feeling about the pandemic, everyone will have a different reaction. So it's not just the event that causes us to feel a certain way. It has to be something else, or we'd all feel the same. So if we take a look at the thinking model and kind of stretch it out and expand it a little bit more, what we see is that the part that's actually missing is our thoughts. So it's not just the coronavirus or any other upsetting event that causes us to feel a certain way, but it's what we think about it. It's how we interpret that, how we interpret how it affects us. It's our assumptions about the world, about people. It's all of that stuff that makes us us that actually impacts our emotions or affects our emotions or causes our emotions. So that's really the piece that was missing in the previous picture, is that it's our thoughts. So one thing I want you to know about, though, is that unfortunately our thoughts are not always accurate. So when we're talking about upsetting emotions like anxiety, worry, stress, often we're not kind of looking at the situation or the event accurately. um, it's often kind of distorted, which I'll get to in a sec. And the other thing that I want you to know is that often our thoughts occur outside of our awareness. So one reason why we think that, it's this situation that causes us to feel that way is because our thoughts occur so quickly that we're mostly not even aware of, what we said to ourselves. We just feel it. Right? So thoughts occur extremely fast, and there's a good reason for it. We want our thinking to occur quickly sometimes. There's lots of examples at how we learn automatic thinking. If we, look at driving, for example, when we're learning to drive, there are so many different steps and so many different thoughts that we need to have all at once that eventually all of that stuff becomes automatic, and we don't have to think about all those separate steps when we're driving, and we become an efficient driver, hopefully. Learning to play an instrument, learning how to type. These are all situations where we can do the behavior or the action while we're not even aware of all the different steps and the thoughts that are going through our mind. It just is so efficient and quick. And so if we have that kind of thinking for those kinds of situations, we also tend to think that way in other situations as well. And of course, the downside to that is, at lightning speed, there can be a whole lot of negative thoughts going on, and we're not aware. And it's those negative thoughts that are the cause of how we feel. So let's just continue to look at this example here. And what you'll see, again, same example, we've got an upsetting event, we've got some emotions, and this time I just really want to highlight that when we have some kind of upsetting emotion like anxiety, worry, stress, panic, there is almost always a negative thought that's happening. These are not positive thoughts that produce worry, anxiety, stress, they're negative. And the thing you should know is that every time you have a negative thought, it is 100% of the time filled with a distortion. And in fact, probably, even up to 10 distortions at once could be occurring in just one thought that you have. So a distortion means that we're not really looking at the situation accurately. We may have blinders on. We're not seeing the whole picture. There's about 10 different kinds of distortions that have been identified, and maybe even more. And the list is on the slide, but in general it's things like, looking at the situation as all or nothing, or black and white, all good, all bad, overgeneralizing, which is when we tend to use the word, always or never. Then we have mental filter, and that's when we tend to like filter out the good and keep the bad. Discounting the positive. Again, we're forgetting about all the positive things and only dwelling on the negative. Then we have mind reading, which is when we tend to assume we know what the other person is thinking, and it's usually not good, but we've never checked it out with them. That can happen. We also have fortune telling, excuse me, which is where we believe that somehow we can see the future, and it's not usually good. Minimization and maximization, or magnification, and that tends to be when we minimize anything good that we've done and magnify our faults or downsides, and we tend to do the reverse for other people. Then there's emotional reasoning, and that's when we tend to reason from how we feel. So I feel worried, therefore there must be something to be worried about. Or I feel anxious, so there must be something dangerous that's going to be happening. Should statements, that's when we, tell ourselves, like, I should have done better, I should be better. Then we have labeling. So that's when we basically call ourselves names. Usually they're not good names. It's usually like dumb, stupid, loser, those kinds of things. And then we have blame. And usually we have, we're blaming ourselves. So we call that self-blame, and sometimes even other blame. So whenever you have an emotion like anxiety, there is almost always a negative thought happening. May even be outside of our awareness. So we need to slow down our thinking to figure out what we're telling ourselves. And then when we can figure out what we're telling ourselves, what we will find is that our thoughts are not accurate and they're distorted. And we will probably find many of these distortions just in one thought. So sometimes this can just be enough to actually, tweak our thinking a little bit and change the way we feel. It can be a fairly simple technique just to kind of catch ourselves. Like, let's say, we do something and we kind of make a mistake, and then we call ourselves a name. in that moment, we can just say to ourselves, oh, yeah, I'm labeling again. Remember, that's an error in my thinking. You know, just because I, feel like I'm a loser doesn't mean I actually am. And sometimes just catching that, the labeling, and even emotional reasoning, sometimes that's enough just to change our emotions just a little bit. So be aware of the fact that our thinking is not always accurate, even though we believe it is. So the next image that I want to show you, and really what I want to get into, is some more specific details on how we can change the way we think. So if we look at this image, you see in the top left-hand corner, we have the green box, and it says upsetting event and emotions. So, we can think of something that's upsetting to us. I had mentioned the coronavirus. We can think of that, and we have some emotions attached to it. And then to the right of that, we have this like big dark cloud, and that's represented by our negative thoughts, or that represents our negative thoughts. And so, what I want to show you and what I want to describe is how we can do a specific few techniques or things with our thoughts, and if we can sort of funnel them or change them or tweak them in some way, when we get to the end or the bottom, hopefully we feel a little bit different. Hopefully there'll be some kind of emotional change when we can kind of come up with some different kind of thought instead of sticking with that original negative thought, which is that dark cloud. And when we get to the bottom, of course, the goal is that you feel a bit different. Maybe you feel better, maybe you feel relieved, or hopefully a little bit less anxious. So that really is the goal here. So I'm going to walk us through an example in a sec, but before I do, I just want to sort of highlight again and reiterate that one of the main concepts that I'm trying to get across in this video is that when you can change the way you think, you change the way you feel. That really changing our thoughts is a huge component to changing the way we feel. Okay. So I'm going to go back to this one for a second. So I want us to kind of think about or imagine somebody with social anxiety. So, that is somebody who feels really uncomfortable in social situations, and they often feel that they're going to do something sort of embarrassing or stupid, and that they're going to be judged by people. I know that, yeah, a lot of people actually have that kind of anxiety. So I thought that might be a good example to use. So if sticking with social anxiety, if you can imagine that there's a social event, a social gathering that's sanctioned that you think you should go to, or you kind of want to go to, but you also don't really want to go to. You're kind of feeling a bit ambivalent about going, and you're feeling anxious and nervous about it. So that's kind of the upsetting event and the emotions. And you have a lot of negative thoughts about it. Some negative thoughts that might be common would be, it's going to be awful. You might say to yourself, these things are always turning out bad. They're never fun. You might even be thinking, I know that people won't like me, and I won't connect well with anyone, or I won't have anything to talk about. Everyone will see how nervous I am. All the other people there will be more accomplished and interesting than me. I'm going to be boring. Or you might even think, well, I should be more outgoing. You might even say, I'm a loser. I really should have done more with my life. I really think it's my parents' fault. So that's just an example of the many thoughts that could be going through your mind when you're thinking about entering, or thinking when you're trying to decide, should I go or should I not, and you're feeling kind of distressed about it. So let's take a look what we could do with some of those thoughts. By the way, I've written a lot of these thoughts down. I know when we're challenging our thoughts, we don't always have a a piece of paper with us, and we can kind of challenge or tweak our thinking in our mind. Sometimes that's the most practical thing to do. But if we really want to get working on changing our thoughts, often it is helpful to write them down, because as you just heard, I just read through a list of thoughts just from one situation, and it's really hard to keep track of them all. So writing them down actually makes a big difference, and that's why lots of people talk about, mood logs or journaling, because when it's on paper, sometimes it's a bit easier to challenge them and to do something about them. Okay. So, what I'm going to guide you through next then is, if we look at that situation, what, how, number one, that sphere, I'm going to walk you through what is the acceptance paradox. Number two, what is self defense, and what do we do about that? And then the third sphere there, that's where we integrate both the acceptance paradox and the self defense paradigm. Okay. So, the acceptance paradox. This is one strategy that we can use to change our thinking. All right, so with this one, what we actually do is we accept some aspect of our negative thought. So we disarm or we agree with that inner critic that we have, but we don't want to crawl into a hole. We don't want to make it worse. So there's this fine balance that happens with them with this one. So we stop fighting with the thought, we stop arguing against it, and we try to kind of soften it a little bit, maybe with some humility and humor. So, to go back to that example of the person who doesn't want to go to the social get together, if we were to use the acceptance paradox, it might look something like this. It might go, um, the truth is, I really don't like these kind of social get togethers. I'm not very outgoing. I'm actually kind of an introvert. And so when I go to these things, I feel kind of shy and uncomfortable and nervous, and I'm really kind of afraid what other people might think when they see that. So, it's not really my thing. So that's the acceptance paradox. So all you're doing is admitting some part of your thoughts. And the paradox in it is that when we admit or agree with some of our negative thoughts, it's actually kind of freeing. It's almost like this burden is released. So instead of trying to fight to be something that we're not, we're just kind of accepting it. And when we do that, sometimes it does bring some inner peace. So it does involve some self acceptance, it involves self compassion. I also find it's one of those things, there's a bit of maybe a spiritual or a philosophical component to this one. And you really might not kind of experience it until you actually practice saying these things to yourself, either in your mind, out loud, or even on a piece of paper. And then you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. As I'm saying it, you might not even buy it. It probably doesn't do anything for you, but it's one of those things. Once you try it, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. So sometimes we just want to, accept part of the negative thoughts. So, one example is, or another one would be, you're right, I do have many flaws. In fact, I discover new ones in myself every day. I'm really far from perfect. So those are some ideas of how we might use the acceptance paradox. So it can be very powerful. So next time you have a negative thought, see if there is a piece of it you can accept. And again, you don't want to fall into that deep, dark hole. You don't want to say something like, oh, I know I'm a loser. I'm totally not outgoing. I look like an idiot. I'm nothing to talk about. Everybody's going to see how nervous I am. Sometimes it's not exactly what you say, but how you say it to yourself. You kind of present it to yourself as, it's okay. It's okay to have some of these pieces about yourself that we're all flawed. And that's part of being human, and we're all human. So give that one a try, see what you think. Another one, which is probably more familiar, and you've probably heard more about this one, has lots of different names, but I'm going to call it self-defense. So, with self defense, whenever you have a negative thought, what you're trying to do is to talk back to that negative thought. You want to challenge it, you want to argue against it, you kind of want to like put up your dukes and fight it. You want to defend yourself and defend against that thought. Show why it's not true. Okay. So what would that actually look like in that example that we were talking about the social get together? So if I go back to my list of negative thoughts that this person might have, if I were to pick, one of the thoughts that I mentioned was, it's going to be awful. If you wanted to challenge that thought, you might want to try something like, well, actually, I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know what this get together is going to look like at all. So, it may be that it's going to be better than what I thought. That's one example. Another one might be if we go back to that original negative thought, which was, I know that people won't like me and I won't connect well with anyone. If that was a worry that you had, you might try and challenge that and say, well, I can't actually read minds. I can't tell the future. I can't read minds. And I don't know how people are going to react to me at all. And I can't assume that people are going to not like me before I've even met them. So, there, I don't know if that's true. And the other thing is, I can't connect well with anyone. Well, actually, there's evidence to say that I do know how to connect with people. I have friends in my life. I get along with my colleagues. I do know how to socialize and to talk to other people. And there's lots of examples that I can think of that would convince me otherwise. Okay. Um, let's see, another one. Another negative thought might be, all the other people there will be more accomplished and interesting than me. I'm boring. Well, what's that got to do with anything? Does that make me better of a human because I'm more accomplished? And what does accomplishment even mean? I have a story. I've lived a life. I have experiences to share. And with the right people, I might feel comfortable doing that. I may not, in fact, be boring. And what even is boring? And even if I don't talk, so what? I actually might still get something out of going to this event, even if I don't really talk to anybody. Maybe if I just listen to somebody else, then, that might mean something to me and maybe to the other person. And even if I, feel embarrassed about being there or about going, that doesn't mean that I'm an embarrassment. So that's just another example of how you could refute that one negative thought. So there's many different ways that we can challenge our thoughts. And so I'm just going to quickly present to you some other things to consider as well. So, I just mentioned we want to see if there's any evidence or proof for your negative thoughts. So you kind of like scan your experiences in history to see if you have any evidence in your life that could prove why your current thought is not accurate. Sometimes we want to see, if we're looking at a situation as all or nothing or black and white, we might want to see, are there any shades of gray? Are there any times where this thought is not true? We might also want to think about, if a friend came to us with this same kind of worry or negative thought, what would we say to them? Because often what we find is that we are much more kind to a friend than we are to ourselves. We tend to beat ourselves up, and we are often a good friend to other people. So another tip might be to, treat ourselves as we would a really good friend, and then see if we can tweak our thoughts that way. Another idea is to think about the situation and to think about, well, what is your worst case scenario? Because sometimes if we can confront that fear in our mind, we sort of look at it and we go, oh, yeah, that's what I'm worried about. But really, that's probably not going to happen. And sometimes that can decrease some of the anxiety too. For instance, the situation about going to this social gathering that the person might not want to go to. Worst case scenario might be, I don't know, you say something really embarrassing and you have to run out of there and everybody's looking at you or something. I mean, it's possible that could happen, but probably it's not going to happen. And so sometimes we just imagine things going really bad, and sometimes if we just face that fear in our mind, whatever it is, it usually doesn't go that bad. And then we can ask ourselves, well, what are the odds of that horrible thing actually happening? And usually turns out it's pretty low. And then if it does actually happen, which would be awful, but if it did happen, then we kind of want to ask ourselves, well, could we handle it? And how would we handle it if it actually happened? So sometimes just sort of imagining and thinking forward to what the situation would look like, would it really happen? And could you handle it? And how would you handle it? Sometimes just thinking that through can help sort of calm some of that anxiety. Another thing that we can do is just try to zoom out and kind of look at the whole picture instead of zeroing in on this one event. It can help sometimes to have a broader, bigger perspective, to think about all of your experiences or thinking about how other people might react. Sometimes that can help. And then, again, we want to pay attention to some of the labels and the words that we use to either describe ourselves or even to describe other people. Because those labels, if we're name calling ourselves or other people even, it doesn't feel good, and then it makes us feel really awful. So sometimes just even catching ourselves, you might make an error somehow and stupid, idiot. Just catch yourself. That is a distortion, just labeling yourself. And sometimes just catching yourself and go, oh, I'm actually not stupid, or I'm not an idiot. I just made a mistake, and everybody makes mistakes. So try doing that with your thinking. If you can just catch those labels, that'll help. And then sometimes you can also, take your problem or take your worry, and you can even like worry to the extreme, even it could even be in a humorous way. Of course, this doesn't work for all worries, but some worries, it could work. Again, the person not wanting to go to the social gathering, they could think of something really dramatic, like something super embarrassing happening. And that as a result of that embarrassing behavior, you will be like the talk of the town. Everyone will be posting it on social media. Everybody will know. And soon, there will be like a meme about you, and you will be world renowned for this behavior that you did at this tiny little social get together. So sometimes when we zoom out and we look at the situation from that perspective and kind of add a bit of humor about it, in fact, some people might get some laughs about it, including yourself, if you were part of a meme. Sometimes if we can look at ourselves from that lens, then, we can think, well, I guess my worry, isn't that much of a worry. We just kind of learn to get some distance from it, and we're able to let go. So we've got acceptance paradox where we find, a little bit of truth and maybe accept it. And then with this one, self-defense, we are fighting against it. We are proving why our thoughts are not true. And we might even be trying a few different strategies to show how it's not true. So with the third idea here, we have number three, where we integrate acceptance and defense. And really all this one is, combining acceptance paradox and combining the self-defense. So we're finding some truth in the thought, maybe even finding some humor and arguing against the thoughts. So, it's true that I have many flaws and I can always improve upon myself, and yet making mistakes doesn't make me a worthless human. It just makes me human. My experience is it's this combo tends to work the best. So again, let's go back to that example, going to the social get together, not really wanting to go, feeling anxious. If I were to use this strategy, it might look something like this. It might look like, the truth is, I really hate going to these social get togethers. I'm really more of an introvert, would probably prefer to be home alone, but this is something that, I would kind of like to do. I'm probably going to look shy. I might not have a lot to say. I might even look a little bit nervous, and yet I might actually kind of enjoy it. And, I have been to some of these kind of get togethers before, and I have enjoyed myself. I've been able to talk to people. I do tend to do better one on one. And, I might just be able to connect with somebody and have a good conversation. And, I might not always have a lot to say because, I'm feeling nervous and I might forget what to talk about, but I do have a life. I have lots of experiences from my life that I can draw from, and I can actually be a good listener too. And I know that's often valued in other people. So, even though I have a lot of negative thoughts about myself and how awful it's going to be, I don't actually know how it's going to turn out. And the truth is, it might actually be kind of enjoyable. And, if it does turn out not that great, it's really not the end of the world. I can handle it. I can just go home and, chalk that up to, oh, well, wasn't the best night spent ever, but I'll still probably have learned something from it. So that's a really long winded response, or talking back and accepting of that negative thought. But hopefully you kind of get the idea. It's this balancing act between accepting a little bit of what you're telling yourself, and that's kind of freeing when we can do that, and also proving why it may not be true at all. So, hopefully, with some of these strategies that I've spoken about, you've been able to get some ideas as to how you might handle some of these negative thoughts that you have. And like I said, sometimes it's, maybe just more practical to do it in your mind, kind of on the go. But if you do have a moment to take some time to write out some of the thoughts, it'll be a whole lot easier. And I think my experience is it can be quite rewarding to try to accept and challenge some of these thoughts on paper, and even actually like practice saying it to yourself. It can be really powerful. So we're actually wrapping up. We're wrapping up the series on anxiety. So, what I want to do is just end off with a few resources. So, if you're interested in continuing your journey and learning more about anxiety, I'd strongly encourage you to check out the Anxiety Canada website. They have a free app available called Mindshift with a lot of great resources on that. They also have a 10-hour course that you can take online called My Anxiety Map. There's one for adults and one for youth as well. The other important resource that I want to tell you about that I'm a a huge advocate of is all the materials by Dr. David Burns. I think his work is just amazing. He really focuses on cognitive therapy, which is what we were talking about today. But he has an amazing podcast called Feeling Good, and it's available wherever you get your podcast for free. And I think there's about 200 episodes now. So a lot of amazing topics on there, not just on anxiety, but on depression, relationships, a lot of good stuff. He's also written quite a few books. He has one that I would say is more geared towards anxiety, and it's called When Panic Attacks. And then he has a new one out just this month called Feeling Great. So those are some great resources. I also want to mention the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Yukon Division. They have a reach out support line that's available, and they also have counseling. So if you're interested in that resource, check out their website for more details. And finally, us at Mental Wellness and Substance Use Services, we too can offer counseling. We also offer a 7-session psychoeducational course called Surviving Anxiety, which goes into a lot of the details of what I've talked about in these 3 videos. So if you want to learn more, and if you want to learn about it with other people, because sometimes it's the experience of learning from other people, not just from me, that can be really helpful, then, if either counseling or the course, if you're interested in either of those options, please give us a call at 456-3838. And that is both for Whitehorse and the communities as well, that some of these resources are available, especially counseling. Okay. Well, I've had fun going through all these tips and things to think about for anxiety, and I hope you've gained a little bit of knowledge too. Thanks a lot.